$1 trillion lost. Trump regrets. Canada strikes. These aren't just sensational headlines. They're the brutal new reality reshaping the global oil industry. Triggered by devastating Trump-era tariffs, Canada has launched a historic retaliation, rerouting its critical oil supplies away from the United States and directly into the heart of Asia, reshaping global power balances in the process. The result? American refineries are scrambling, gas prices are ticking upward, and millions of U.S. households are about to feel the pinch. When a $1 trillion energy shift happens overnight, it doesn't just change corporate profits, it shakes the foundations of everyday life. If you're serious about understanding the forces tearing apart the 21st century energy map, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell. Because this story is just beginning. Canada's strategic breakaway. In May 2024, the long-delayed Trans Mountain Expansion project finally began pumping crude oil westward, not south. Nearly 900,000 barrels of Canadian oil per day, crude that once flowed reliably to U.S. Gulf Coast. Refineries were suddenly rerouted toward Asia. Before this move, Canada supplied more than 60% of all U.S. crude oil imports, accounting for roughly a quarter of America's total oil consumption. Major U.S. refineries in Texas, Louisiana, and Illinois were built specifically to handle Canada's heavy oil blends. Losing this steady supply has forced refineries to scramble for replacements, pushing them into less efficient operating modes and driving up costs. In particular, states like Texas and Louisiana are now facing refinery bottlenecks, as facilities that were calibrated for heavy crude struggle with lighter domestic blends. Gulf Coast refineries are experiencing throughput reductions of 5% to 10%, impacting local economies and pushing gasoline prices higher. Meanwhile, in Canada, provinces like Alberta and British Columbia coordinated aggressively to fast-track the Trans Mountain Expansion. The provincial and federal governments offered joint investment incentives, cutting regulatory hurdles to ensure the pipeline's completion. This coordinated move showcased an increasingly independent energy policy stance, one that no longer prioritizes U.S. markets as default customers. The shift isn't just logistical, it's existential. Ottawa sent a clear message. Canada will no longer be a junior energy partner to Washington, shackled by outdated alliances. The rise of the Asian energy axis. China, India, and Japan, the giants of Asian energy consumption, wasted no time capitalizing. Within months, Canada secured long-term oil contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. China alone agreed to import around 187,000 barrels per day, while India's Reliance Industries and Japan's INOS quickly followed. Why the rush? Asia has been facing an underreported energy crunch since early 2024. Sanctions on Russia, OPEC+ production cuts, and internal demand spikes created a hunger for reliable heavy crude. But beyond immediate shortages, strategic national policies played a role. China, for example, expanded its Strategic Petroleum Reserve (SPR) initiatives aggressively, aiming to stockpile reserves equivalent to 90 days of imports by 2025. India passed its Strategic Oil Reserves Expansion Act to double its emergency stockpiles. Japan, still reliant on imported energy, pursued diversification policies to avoid overdependence on Middle Eastern suppliers. Canada's rerouted oil was a lifeline, offering stable supply and pricing discounts compared to volatile Middle Eastern alternatives. Analysts estimate that China's imports of Canadian heavy crude could grow by another 20% by 2026 if the political environment remains stable. Meanwhile, America's share of global oil influence continues to slip away as Asian economies quietly but systematically secure the energy supply needed for their industrial futures. Trump's tariff backfire. This seismic shift wasn't inevitable. It was triggered by a major political gamble. In late 2024, the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian oil, steel, and lumber, aiming to strong-arm Ottawa in trade negotiations. Internally, the move sparked intense backlash within key sectors. The American Petroleum Institute, API, the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM, and the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association, AFPM, all publicly criticized the tariffs, warning that they would disrupt domestic production, hurt competitiveness, and raise costs for consumers. Refineries in Louisiana and Texas, particularly dependent on Canadian heavy blends, reported immediate operational difficulties. Multiple independent refinery operators warned that throughput could decline by as much as 15% if Canadian imports fell sharply. Politically, the tariff decision polarized U.S. stakeholders. Some agricultural states, which relied on Canadian fertilizer and lumber, also voiced opposition, fearing reciprocal tariffs. But the warnings went unheeded. Rather than folding, Canada responded by completing the $34 billion Trans Mountain expansion, expanding Vancouver's shipping terminals, and fortifying its Arctic logistics network. Instead of concessions, America got consequences: higher costs, tighter supplies, and a $1 trillion strategic loss. A self-inflicted wound that continues to ripple across multiple sectors of the U.S. economy. The secondary shockwave. Russia. Moves in Canada's crude vanished from U.S. markets. Russia didn't hesitate. Crude shipments from Russia's western ports surged by 100,000 barrels per day, and Arctic shipping lanes lit up with activity. Russia's Arctic oil exports via the Northern Sea route rose 42% year-over-year by early 2025, despite Western sanctions. Over 60 VLCC-class, very large crude carrier, tankers traversed Arctic waters between January and April, many destined for Chinese and Indian ports. Meanwhile, Russia and China have been quietly strengthening maritime cooperation under the Polar Silk Road Initiative, part of Beijing's broader Belt and Road project. Moscow has invested over $7 billion upgrading Arctic ports and icebreaker fleets, allowing for year-round shipping even in sub-zero conditions. Canada, for its part, expanded its Arctic monitoring infrastructure, deploying new early warning radar arrays and enhancing Coast Guard patrols to safeguard sovereignty claims along the Northwest Passage. A new northern oil axis is emerging, where Russian and Canadian energy streams flow eastward, dramatically reshaping trade maps and forcing NATO policymakers to rethink Arctic defense strategies for the first time since the Cold War. The long-term dilemma. Canada's bet on oil versus green transition. Yet, Canada's triumph comes with a ticking clock. The International Energy Agency predicts that global oil demand will peak at around 105.6 million barrels per day by 2029. Then, enter a gradual decline. Asia, Canada's new market, is aggressively pushing electric vehicle adoption. China aims for 1/3 of all new car sales to be electric by 2030. India, starting from just 2.5% EV penetration in 2024, targets 30% by decade's end. Even Japan, historically reliant on oil, is pivoting toward EVs and hydrogen fuel. Critically, if Asia's green transition accelerates faster than expected, Canada's long-term bet could backfire severely. Analysts from Wood Mackenzie warn that if EV penetration exceeds 40% in China and India by 2030, demand for heavy crude could fall by 2 to 3 million barrels per day, disproportionately affecting exporters like Canada. Moreover, the $34 billion cost of the Trans Mountain expansion, already 5 times over its original budget, carries high fixed maintenance and debt servicing costs. Reduced volumes could leave Canada saddled with expensive, underutilized infrastructure and strained public finances. Ottawa faces a tough reality. While energy geopolitics today favor their pivot, technological and environmental trends threaten to erode that advantage within a single decade. Canada's gamble is not just about winning today's trade war, it's about surviving tomorrow's green revolution. Final thoughts. Canada's strategic pivot is no longer just retaliation. It's a seismic reset of global energy power. Trump's tariff gamble didn't just weaken America's refinery belt, it triggered a historic $1 trillion loss that fractured the Western energy alliance and empowered Asia's oil dominance. Meanwhile, Russia and Canada are building invisible highways of oil through the Arctic, creating a new world where energy isn't about who drills the most, but who controls the routes. In this volatile new chessboard, the stakes are existential. If Washington can't adapt, America could lose not just energy security, but a major pillar of its global dominance. Cliffhanger. The next 6 months could decide the next 50 years. Will the U.S. recalibrate fast enough, or will new alliances carve up the 21st century energy map without them? Stay tuned, we're just getting started. Do you think the United States can still turn things around, or is it already too late? Comment your view below, and if you haven't yet, subscribe right now so you won't miss our next explosive deep dive into the battles shaping the future.